People who take walks at night, what's the scariest thing you've seen? Was out for a late walk in the rain, always enjoy it because it's peaceful, smells great, quiet, and never see anyone. Walked off this trail back into the road and saw a big pile of garbage under a tarp at the end of the cul-de-sac the trail ends in, got a creepy chill like that could be a dead body or something and I'd never know, just got a weird feeling that snapped me out of my calm walk. Picked up the pace. About 500 yards away parked car with a guy sitting there, in the dark, in the rain, like 1 p.m. ish car off, just sitting there. Got super creeped out at this point and changed my route back to the main road and hurried home. Turns out it was a dead body someone had dumped under that tarp, was under there for 4 days before someone investigated it. The guy in the car turned out to be just a random dude, guy lives there and totally unrelated to the body. Still, took a few months off from my late night walks alone in the woods. Many years ago my boyfriend and I decided to take a late night walk around his generally safe neighborhood. We got a few steps past the driveway when a shirtless guy came running over with a hammer in one hand, and a machete in the other. My boyfriend stayed super calm and asked the man what was going on. Apparently, some man had just broken into his apartment and tried to kidnap his young daughter, so he was chasing him down to either shatter his fingers with the hammer or chop off his hands entirely with the machete, and he thought my boyfriend was possibly this man. My boyfriend gave me his car keys and told me to take myself home. We lived apart at the time, so I went and got his car, and by the time I was backing out of the driveway, the man was screaming at my boyfriend, who was just standing there calmly with his hands in the air. I drove a block away so the man wouldn't see me, rolled the windows down to try to hear what was happening, and called the cops. The machete man ended up running off and I don't know if they ever got him. My boyfriend was fine though, thank God. Many something like this happened a few years back. My boyfriend and I had been exploring some dirt roads on Vancouver Island, south of Nanaimo. We found this super run-down campsite beside a river and decided to take a look. It had been snowing the whole drive and the whole site was covered in pristine snow. At one point we split up so I could find a place to pee. He went south and I went northwest. I finished up and wandered back south when I noticed completely fresh boot treads in the snow heading north and out of the site. They went right by where I'd stopped to pee in the bushes. My hair was standing on end when I alerted my BF to the tracks. They'd actually skirted the edge of the site from the road, past where I was peeing and north out into the woods. Needless to say we got the fuck out of there fast. The trip back turned into a fiasco too. What a gong show. Mountain lions can also be unpredictable if they are starving. Even a smaller one could throw caution to the wind and attack a full-grown adult male out of desperation. When my dad was living in Nevada he was attacked by a mountain lion that he estimated at about 80 to 90 pounds and looking a bit emaciated. It was very late afternoon and he was way off the beaten path in the mountains about 100 miles north of Las Vegas. He was getting his telescope and camera gear set up next to his Jeep Cherokee for a night of astrophotography when he got the tingle, that feeling he wasn't alone. He was at the open rear door of his vehicle and he turned around and there was a mountain lion not 20 feet away from him at the edge of some brush. My dad slowly reached for the tire iron he kept on the floor of the truck, never taking his eyes off the cat. As soon as he had the iron in his hand the mountain lion lunged for him and my dad swung the iron overhead, smacking the mountain lion right in the skull. The mountain lion ran off and my dad quickly got into his truck, closed the door, and calmed down from the adrenaline rush of his near-death experience. After he calmed down the crazy bastard stayed for the night and did his astrophotography. I guess he figured the mountain lion wasn't coming back for another whack on the head. A couple years ago, I was at the start of a typical weekday night stroll. I was living in an apartment complex in Florida at the time, so it was the only opportune time to do so, without being completely drenched. The exact moment I was crossing the sidewalk adjacent to the entrance of said complex, I witnessed a middle-aged dude punch his wife/significant other in her face, in full view of me, and another passerby. The passerby called the cops, the dude was arrested. It wasn't a scary situation to my own well-being, but I did find the situation chilling. For one, how nonchalant the guy was in assaulting his wife/so in public, and two, how both the abuser/so were pleading for the cops not to be called. It was domestic abuse so normalized, it happened in full public, without any second thought/rationale. This happened to someone I knew in school. Her stepdad was horribly abusive. They were moving in somewhere and she was helping him carry a couch. She accidentally dropped it and he full-on slapped her across the face. Someone nearby saw it and yelled "Hey!" She talked about it years later, but it had been so normalized for her that without any conversation, they jumped in the car and drove away before the lady could call the cops. Like they were partners in crime, keeping his horrible abusive of her secret. It's insane how normalized it can become. Her mom finally left him when she threatened to move in with a friend for the rest of high school. But he used to show up at after-school functions to try to scare her. To this day, if I ever see her ex-stepdad is on fire, and I have a glass of water, I am 100% going to drink it. Our planned camping spot for the night was full. We'd backpacked all day to get to that location and there wasn't anywhere close to set up our tents. We called our guy on the outside to come pick us up as it was getting late. We didn't have anywhere to set up camp, and a storm was approaching. We hiked to the nearest exit point on the trail, met our pickup guy, and he drove us a few miles to the nearest campsite we were familiar with that we could basically drive up to. Long logging path pretty deep in the mountains that we had hiked to in previous years, so we were kind of familiar with the area. Anyways, we hop out of the van and it's pitch black out. No moon, it's April in the mountains and still pretty chilly. We're cold, hungry, and exhausted. That's when we notice this motherfucker staring at us from behind a tree. I know this sounds like an asleep story, but it's 100% true and probably the most scared I've ever been. We notice this guy, no headlamp, no equipment, no backpack, just standing there. One of our group, former Marine, yells at him to come out and explain what his deal is. This guy walks a few feet out from behind the tree and we all shine our lights on him, and I shit you not, this dude's white t-shirt is covered in what looks like blood smears. He's pretty rough looking, long hair, long beard, crazy eyes, and he was wearing a bloody t-shirt and shorts in 35-degree weather at night. We're all pretty freaked out, and this is a pretty experienced group of hikers who've seen some shit. We ask this guy what his deal is and he says we can't camp here. We tell him that that's exactly what we plan to do, and he says I don't think that's a good idea for any of you. We kind of turn to discuss as a group and when we look back he's hidden back behind the tree. As a group we basically decided none of us were getting any sleep that night if we stayed here, so we packed up the van and left. As we were pulling out, this guy pulled out one of those red filtered flashlights and ran after our van. I'm not kidding, he followed us for at least a quarter mile on foot. He was fast as fuck. We passed a park ranger on the road and flagged him down to tell him how weird that dude was acting, and he said he'd go investigate. I didn't hear anything about it again for 5 years. For the longest time I thought he was probably some pot farmer who had a nearby plot, or a moonshiner who was just living in the woods and didn't want us near his still. People hunt all the time out there, which would maybe explain the blood a little bit. But I was recently at an event with some of those guys again for the first time in years and that creepy dude from the woods got brought up. One of them who still lives nearby broke out his phone and said, "I forgot to tell you guys, I saw him again." Pulls up a news article and there he was. So obviously the same guy. He'd been arrested for murdering some poor girl on the trail. Timelines didn't match up, so I fully believe we saw this guy shortly after he'd murdered someone else. He hasn't been charged with anything else as far as I'm aware. I'm not backpacking without a gun anymore. One of my old professors was a Florida wildlife officer. He would oftentimes be the only officer within a 10 to 15 mile radius in the middle of the Everglades. He had some wild stories of shit that he seen, but the one that stuck out to me the most was when he told us about a time that he saw a truck in a road where it shouldn't have been and let the guy off with a warning. He was somewhat new to the force and decided that he didn't want to harass some guy fishing, so he let him go. A few hours later he saw the naked body of a woman in her early 20s further down the road. He contacted state/county law enforcement with a description of the guy and the tag numbers. The vehicle was found in Orlando months later abandoned, and the owner was the dead lady they found in the Everglades. They never caught the guy driving the truck. The truck had not been reported as stolen and the lady was not reported as missing. He said he felt an immense amount of guilt after that because he was trying to be a cool cop and didn't ask the guy for ID or registration or anything, just told him he can't be fishing there at that time and let him go on his way. When I was in middle school, most school nights I had to walk about 1/10 of a mile or so to my grandparents' house to stay the night, as my mom worked nights at the time. So I usually did this right as it was turning night to maximize my time at home. Curfew was nightfall, so usually it was a run. Well, at this point in my life I had never seen a coyote and always wondered if I were to get attacked, could I survive? The thought was there basically every trip, and I had no desire to find out. Well, I moved in with my dad after 8th grade, and when I was in 10th or 11th grade I was visiting my mom. I had to go grab something from my grandparents' house, and took a bicycle of a younger sibling. So I remembered all those nights before with that thought, but now I was a lot more buff than I had been back then. But I still didn't want to find out. Well, on the way back I glanced out to a pasture beside me that was overgrown. There was a figure running parallel with me, keeping pace easily. I was like, holy fuck, it's happening. And pedaled super fast. I entered my mom's driveway, and heard the creature coming across the road. Her yard was sloped downhill, so I let the bicycle coast down and I leapt off and full of adrenaline flexed with my arms in front of me and screamed, "Let's go." It was my mom's dog. I felt relieved but also disappointed because of the adrenaline rush, lol, but definitely relieved. Found out later coyotes are tiny anyway, not that I'd want to fight one. I've never been afraid of the dark. Grew up in the countryside, where the nearest street light was 10 miles away, so I'm comfortable in dark places, so much so that I often take my dog for a walk at around midnight just because I like the peace and quiet of the night. I live in a city now, so something about the dark is just soothing to me. That being said, one of the scariest things I've ever experienced, I genuinely have no explanation for. Living in a city, I used to drive out 20 to 30 miles into the country to do some astrophotography. As I'm driving out one night, I see this guy walking at the side of the road with no lights, reflectors, and a big backpack. Didn't think much of it other than it being a little odd. 5 miles later, I see the same guy walking again. I haven't changed directions, turned, and I've been doing 50 mph. As I drove past, he looked and waved at me. I was pretty spooked, but I drove on. I must be imagining things. It can't be the same guy. I get to my field in the middle of nowhere, park up and get the camera out, and turn off all the lights so my eyes adjust to the dark. All is going well, and for 30 minutes I'm content, and starting to relax. Suddenly I hear a rustling near the hedge by the road. Crunching leaves, grass being kicked. It was footsteps. I immediately get a feeling of dread, like I'm in severe danger and something bad was going to happen. I grab my camera, toss it in the car, get in, lock the doors and turn on the headlights. When I turn out of the field, I pass where I heard the noise and saw fresh footprints in the mud but no sign of anyone. I race back home, driving double the speed limit, constantly checking my mirrors for anyone. I park up around the corner and wait in the car with the lights off for 30 minutes, watching. Nothing shows up. I get home, lock all the doors and sleep with a knife under my pillow that night. I honestly don't know what really happened that night, but part of me knows that creepy guy I passed on the road twice was in that field. Not a walk, but I frequently run in the wee hours of the morning. Where I live is basically suburbia meets country roads. Anyways, one morning about 400 I went for a long run. About 2 miles in along a sidewalk out in the middle of nowhere next to a cow field, I saw two individuals, a male and female, fully dressed in what I would describe as fancy/cooter clothing, standing on the sidewalk giving me the 50-ed stare. The man had no eyebrows and was wearing sunglasses, while the woman stared at me with a look I can only describe as Lady Gaga in American Horror Story. It was completely dark minus a small light above the cow field about 20 yards away. They didn't say a word, they didn't move when I was running towards them. Only staring at me without moving a single facial muscle. I immediately noped and ran to the other side of the street and ran as hard as I could. As I ran past them, they both turned their torsos with the exact same facial expressions in synchrony as I ran past them. Both of them had this weird smile on their faces, almost like they knew who I was. It almost felt like they were analyzing me, or as if their eyes were seeing through me. They never said a word and never made any other movements. When I circled back an hour later, they were gone. I've never been more creeped out on a run, and I've ran past snakes, crack addicts, floods, and a man without pants. This one happened to me a few years ago when I was in my early 30s. I live in a Southern California coastal town near a major university, but close enough to wilderness areas that encounters with skunks, possums, and raccoons are a daily/nightly part of life. I had a somewhat timid pit bull. A past housemate locked himself out of the house and had to break in. When he finally got back in, he found my dog hiding under a table crying, who sometimes demanded late-night walks before bed. Her favorite route was near my house around a large local park along a key thoroughfare between a shopping hub for the local community and the university. The park is sporadically lit and home to critters and occasionally transients. It's also, due to one of those weird flukes of weather and geography, always several degrees colder than the surrounding areas and sometimes home to spooky-ass ground fog. So on this particular fall evening a few years back, my dog and I were walking around the park at about 11 p.m. We approach one of the poorly lit sections of the park exterior, which has high bushes separating the sidewalk from the parking lot and/or park itself. The bushes are right on the edge of the sidewalk and about arm's length in width. All of a sudden my dog starts freaking out. Like full on attack mode with deep barking and snarling. This was completely out of nowhere, no rustling noises or anything else you would expect to evoke that kind of reaction, and totally uncharacteristic for her. Typically when she spotted a raccoon or skunk, she was more curious about the weird animal in front of her than anything else, or she would start loudly crying and embarrassing herself. But she almost never flipped out. I immediately yank her away from the bush and run down the sidewalk, thinking, oh shit, we're about to be skunked. After 25 yards or so, I turn around, pull out my pocket flashlight, dog still freaking out in the meantime, and shine it back toward the bush, expecting to see a critter saunter away slowly. Instead, we see a man emerge from what I later found out was a hollowed-out section of the bush on the other side of the sidewalk. He very casually stood up and looked at us. He looked to be in his late 30s/early 40s and was quite clearly not homeless. He was dressed like a suburban dad, jeans and windbreaker, and appeared to be completely sober. I remember noticing that he was wearing dress shoes and fixating on how out of place it seemed. A bit of background info: I am a big dude, somewhere in the ballpark of 6'8", 320 pounds, and I spent a number of years moonlighting as a bouncer at a local bar, so I can spot a drunk pretty easily. After the initial shock of what I was seeing wore off, I mustered my best scary bouncer voice and shouted, "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" while my dog was still going apeshit. The guy took off running at a full sprint toward my neighborhood. I called the police. There's a sheriff's substation at the shopping center less than a mile away, and explained what I had just seen. For the rest of our walk, Multiple police cars were patrolling the park and the neighborhood with spotlights shining the entire time. From what I understand, they never found the guy. I have no idea what he was doing in the bushes or what would have happened if somebody other than me and my dog had walked by. The bush was uprooted a few years ago, but I still think about it every time I walk on that side of the park.